In the cozy, slightly foggy town of Misty Hollow, life wasn't just ordinary, it was predictably ordinary. Every person knew everyone else's business, or at least thought they did. So, when Dr. Jasper Lynn, the town's soul healer, set up his modest office on the main street with a large sign that read, "Let's face your fears together," people couldn't help but take it as both an invitation and a dare. Jasper was an eccentric fellow, the kind of person who wore scarves in summer and believed in the transformative power of dreams. In a town where most folks considered dreams to be little more than leftovers of last night's dinner, Jasper's dream-based therapy had been, to put it mildly, slow to catch on. Still, he'd acquired a small, loyal clientele, folks who didn't mind being seen in his office, though they'd quickly change the subject if anyone brought it up at the grocery store. One evening, after a particularly quiet day with only a single client, a painfully shy librarian named Sylvia who barely whispered her fears, Jasper noticed a peculiar object in his office. It was an old, ornate mirror, leaning against the far wall as if it had been there all along. But Jasper knew it hadn't been. He'd have noticed something that odd before. The mirror was tall, taller than him by a head, and framed in dark wood with intricate carvings that seemed to twist and move when he wasn't looking directly at them. He took a few cautious steps forward, reaching out to touch the glass. As soon as his fingers brushed against it, he felt a strange warmth spreading through his hand. Dream therapy in antique mirrors, he muttered to himself, chuckling. What could possibly go wrong? That night, as Jasper drifted into sleep, he had the oddest sensation of slipping, not just into a dream, but into another world entirely, a place filled with familiar voices and laughing faces. He found himself in the town square, only it wasn't like any town square he'd ever seen before. Misty Hollow looked brighter, shinier, with every building outlined in a warm, comforting glow. People were dancing, their movements fluid and joyful, while music drifted on a gentle breeze, and then, in the middle of the square, he saw it, the mirror, right there, as if waiting for him. Intrigued, he walked closer. The townsfolk seemed oblivious to him now, laughing and twirling, each caught up in their own joy. He reached the mirror, staring into the depths of the glass, and what he saw there made him gasp. It was himself, yes, but not quite. The reflection was of a version of himself he barely recognized, confident, full of an energy and warmth that he felt he hadn't truly possessed in years. His eyes, usually a bit weary from years of late-night counseling sessions, sparkled with a light he could hardly believe was his. Suddenly, the mirror Jasper winked at him, a broad, mischievous grin spreading across his face. Jasper felt a flash of unease but couldn't look away. And then, as if a veil had been lifted, he felt his own insecurities and fears rushing forward, swirling around him. It was like a storm had broken loose, every worry, every lingering doubt he'd pushed down, rising to the surface. The mirror Jasper spoke, his voice low and taunting. "You're a fraud, aren't you? Pretending to help them, while you're the one who's scared." "No," Jasper whispered, feeling a wave of panic. "Oh, yes," the reflection sneered. "Who are you really helping? You think you can take their fears and leave them light, but you're only making yourself heavy." Jasper stumbled back, and the scene faded. He woke up in his bed, drenched in sweat, heart pounding as if he'd been running for miles. He tried to laugh it off, chalking it up to nerves or indigestion, but as he got up and dressed for the day, he couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had happened. The next day, he received more clients than he'd had in weeks, and each one of them told him the same thing. They'd dreamed of him, of the mirror, and of secrets they hadn't realized they'd kept hidden. One of his first clients was Mabel, the town's self-appointed gossip and professional busybody. She sat down, arms crossed, fixing him with a look that was half curious, half skeptical. "All right, Jasper," she said, narrowing her eyes. "I don't know what you did, but I had the strangest dream last night. There was a mirror. And it showed me things." Jasper raised an eyebrow, feigning nonchalance. "Oh? And what did it show you?" Mabel's face softened, a blush creeping into her cheeks. She glanced around as if someone might overhear, even though they were alone in the room. "It showed me, well, it showed me sitting alone at home, with nothing to do and no one to talk to." Her voice cracked, and she quickly covered it with a cough. "Now, that doesn't mean anything, of course, just a silly dream. I'm perfectly content, you know that. But it got me thinking, maybe I am a little scared of being alone." Jasper nodded, watching her carefully. He wanted to reassure her, but a voice in his head, the voice from the mirror, whispered, "Are you really helping her? Or just feeding her fear?" Ignoring it, he put on his most reassuring smile. "Dreams are a doorway to our subconscious, Mabel. Sometimes they show us what we'd rather not see, but facing it is the first step to understanding it." Mabel's eyes grew misty, and she nodded, seemingly comforted. But as she left, Jasper felt the weight of her fear settling on his shoulders, lingering like a dark cloud. Over the next few days, more and more people came to him with similar stories. Each time, they sat down, shared their dreams, and he guided them through their revelations. But with each session, Jasper felt a heaviness building inside him, as if he were collecting their fears and carrying them with him. One night, after another exhausting day, he slumped down at his desk, staring at the mirror which now sat in the corner of his office. It seemed to watch him, its glass gleaming in the dim light. "You're not real," he muttered, half to himself, half to the mirror. "You're just a dream." But as he looked closer, his reflection seemed to shift, his own face growing pale and tired, eyes shadowed with a weight he hadn't noticed before. The mirror Jasper smiled sadly, a reflection of his own fears staring back at him. "Is it worth it, Jasper?" the reflection whispered, voice soft and haunting. "Taking on their burdens, leaving yourself so hollow?" He clenched his fists, swallowing hard. "They need me," he whispered, as much to himself as to the reflection. "I'm helping them." "Are you?" the reflection asked. "Or are you only making yourself heavy with pain that isn't yours?" Jasper turned away, feeling a chill settle over him. That night, as he lay in bed, he thought of all the faces he'd seen, all the secrets he'd held, and he wondered if perhaps the mirror had a point. The next morning, he woke up feeling drained, as if he'd run a marathon in his sleep. But he pushed himself out of bed, determined to keep helping, even as the voice from the mirror echoed in his mind. As more people came to him, their dreams and secrets piling up, Jasper felt himself slipping. His usual cheer faded, replaced by a growing weariness. The townsfolk noticed, whispering about the change in him, wondering if perhaps their trusted healer was struggling himself. Finally, one evening, his closest friends, Mabel, the baker Thomas, and the librarian Sylvia, gathered in his office, concern written across their faces. "Jasper," Mabel began, her voice soft. "You look like you haven't slept in days. We're worried about you." Jasper forced a smile, waving off their concern. "I'm fine, just a little tired." But Sylvia shook her head, her quiet voice filled with worry. "We all have our fears, Jasper. You've helped us face ours, but who's helping you?" For the first time, Jasper felt the weight of their concern, the warmth of their friendship. And in that moment, he realized that perhaps he didn't have to carry all of it alone. Jasper looked into their eyes, each of them mirroring his reflection in the mirror, haunted, concerned, and, above all, burdened. In Mabel's face, he saw traces of his own fear, reflected like a cloudy film over her usually sharp eyes. Thomas the baker shifted uneasily, his joviality dimmed, hands worrying the hem of his apron. Even Sylvia, the ever-composed librarian, seemed pale and shaken. They needed him, and he had always been their guide through the depths of fear. But now, seeing them all so worried about him, he felt a pang of something that made his chest tighten. Was it guilt? Or was it the realization that he had been keeping himself isolated, bearing the weight of everyone's fears without ever admitting his own? Mabel took a tentative step forward and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her voice was gentle, a far cry from her usual gossiping tone. "We all lean on you, Jasper, and maybe we've taken it for granted that you'd always be there to help. But maybe it's time we face our fears together, including you." A silence settled over the room, heavy and thick, pressing down on Jasper in a way he hadn't felt before. It was as if the mirror itself was watching, waiting to see if he would let these people, his friends, in on his own secret fears. Taking a deep, trembling breath, Jasper nodded. Maybe you're right," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've been carrying so many of your fears, that I've forgotten what it's like to be me. To be Jasper." Thomas, usually a man of few words, spoke up. "We know how much you've done for us, Jasper. Let us help you, too. Let's face this mirror of yours together." The suggestion sent a shiver down Jasper's spine, but he knew they were right. He had been facing this alone for too long. And so, with a nod, he walked over to the corner of the room where the mirror stood, its frame seeming to shimmer with a strange, pulsing light that he turned back to his friends. "This mirror, it shows our deepest fears, the parts of ourselves we keep hidden. Are you sure you want to see?" Each of them nodded, determination glinting in their eyes. They'd all faced the mirror in their dreams, but never together, and never with Jasper by their side. He could sense their fear, but he could also sense their resolve. They were ready to face whatever the mirror showed them. Together, Jasper took a deep breath and placed his hand on the mirror's cold, polished surface. Instantly, a wave of energy shot through him, a dizzying sensation that left him feeling as though he were suspended between reality and dreams. He glanced at his friends, who stood close by, watching him with trust and anxiety etched on their faces. One by one, they each reached out and placed their hands on the mirror, creating a circle of connection. And in an instant, the room around them melted away, replaced by a vast, swirling mist that wrapped around them like a blanket, cocooning them in a strange, otherworldly silence. When the mist cleared, they found themselves standing in the heart of Misty Hollow, though it looked different, more ethereal, like a version of the town painted in soft, dreamlike hues. The buildings were outlined in a golden glow, and everything seemed to shimmer as if dipped in stardust. But as they looked closer, they noticed the faces of the townspeople, each one distorted by shadows, their expressions twisted with hidden fears. The mirror appeared before them, larger than ever, looming over the town square like a great, dark portal. Its surface rippled, showing scenes from each of their lives, moments of vulnerability, flashes of their deepest fears. Jasper felt a pang of dread, but his friends stood strong beside him, their hands gripping his shoulders, their presence a steadying force. Slowly, they stepped toward the mirror, drawn by the images flickering across its surface. First, it showed Mabel, her face illuminated by the soft glow of the mirror. In the reflection, she was sitting alone at a kitchen table, a single candle burning beside her as she stared into the empty room. Her usual fierce expression had softened into something vulnerable, something small. A voice, soft and echoing, drifted from the mirror. "Mabel, you fear loneliness, yet you push others away. You hide your heart, afraid to let anyone in." Mabel's eyes widened, and she took a shaky breath. I suppose that's true, she murmured, her voice barely a whisper. She looked at Jasper, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. All these years, I've prided myself on being independent, on not needing anyone. But maybe I've been lying to myself. Jasper reached out, taking her hand in his. There's no shame in needing others, Mabel. We all do, even if we don't like to admit it. Next, the mirror shifted, showing Thomas standing in his bakery, his face lined with worry as he stared at an empty cash register. His shoulders slumped, and he looked as though the weight of the world rested on him alone. Thomas, you fear failure, yet you hide behind humor, pretending you're unaffected. But you carry the weight of your dreams alone, afraid to let others see your struggle. Thomas's usual light-hearted demeanor fell away, replaced by a look of raw vulnerability. I want to make people happy. I want to succeed, but I'm so scared of letting everyone down. Sylvia, ever the quiet observer, stepped forward, her gaze steady. Thomas, you don't have to carry that burden by yourself. We're all here for you. We'll help you, just as you've always been there to make us smile. The mirror's reflection shifted again, showing Sylvia in the library, her fingers tracing the spines of dusty books as she moved through the rows of shelves. In the reflection, her face was etched with loneliness, her eyes downcast, as though searching for something she could never find. Sylvia, you fear being forgotten, yet you retreat into silence, hiding behind walls of books and solitude. You yearn for connection, but you're afraid to reach out. Sylvia's usually calm demeanor faltered, her lip trembling. I've always thought that maybe it was better to stay in the background, to let others take the spotlight. But deep down, I want to be seen. I want to be remembered. Mabel reached out, resting a hand on Sylvia's shoulder. We see you, Sylvia. You're part of us, just as much as anyone else. Don't be afraid to let yourself shine. Finally, the mirror turned to Jasper, and he felt his heart tighten as his own reflection appeared. In the glass, he saw himself standing alone in his office, surrounded by shadows. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, as though drained by the weight of all the fears he'd taken on. Jasper, you fear vulnerability, yet you carry the burdens of others, hiding behind the role of the healer. You fear being seen, afraid that without your purpose, you are nothing. Jasper swallowed hard, the truth of the mirror's words cutting deep. He had always defined himself by his role, by his ability to help others, but he had never truly allowed himself to be vulnerable, to let others see him as anything but the healer. His friends surrounded him, their hands resting on his shoulders, their presence a warm, grounding force. Mabel spoke, her voice firm and unwavering. You don't have to be the strong one all the time, Jasper. We're here for you, just as you've been here for us. As they stood together, each of them facing their fears, the mirror's surface began to glow, the images fading into a soft, golden light. The weight that had settled over Jasper's heart lifted, replaced by a warmth he hadn't felt in years, a sense of connection, of belonging, of being seen and accepted for who he truly was. The dream world around them shimmered, the mist lifting as they found themselves back in Jasper's office, the mirror standing quietly in the corner, its surface calm and still. They looked at each other, their faces a mixture of relief and quiet understanding. They had faced their fears, together, and come through the other side stronger, bound by a shared vulnerability that made them more than just friends. It made them family. Jasper smiled, his heart light. Thank you, he said, his voice filled with gratitude. For being here, for helping me see that I don't have to carry this alone. Mabel chuckled, brushing away a stray tear. Well, don't get used to it. Next time, we're charging you for the therapy." They all laughed, the sound filling the room with a warmth that dispelled the last of the shadows, and in the corner, the mirror gleamed softly, a silent witness to the power of friendship, of vulnerability, and the courage to face one's deepest fears, knowing that no one has to do it alone. The end.